Good evening to all. Kalispera se όλους. I'm Chrysanthi Gallou, Director of the Center for Spartan and Peloponnesian Studies and Associate Professor of Archaeology at the University of Nottingham, and the host of today's Sparta Live webinar. A warm welcome to this year's Sparta Live webinar series, the sixth series since May 2020. It's really nice to welcome back our dedicated viewers and also the new friends of the center. For those of you who may be attending the series for the first time, Sparta Live is an online program of lively online workshops themed around the history, archaeology, and legacy of Sparta and Laconia, hosted jointly by Nottingham Center for Spartan and Peloponnesian Studies and the city of Sparta, the site of ancient Sparta in Greece. Today, I'm joined by our lovely assistants from the center who will be helping with all practical matters. This is Ambi Costello, our new MA student, and Sarantos Minopetros, our honorary research fellow at the center. Before we proceed with our webinar and introducing our esteemed speakers, we have a little welcome introduction, a surprise by a dear friend of the center, the world-famous wandering melodist, Mr. Thanasis Kleopas, who will play an ancient hymn with his lyre for all of you to wish the series and all of us a very good start. Mr. Kleopas, the floor is yours.
Hello to everybody, and I would like to play the first Delphic hymn, which is a hymn dedicated to God of music and light, Apollo. The hymn describes his daily life and was found about 130 BC. So, the first Delphic hymn. Osana sikuri apanasitu, tas repeteras ezrana magantite, stanitos enevidus, lana cantini sete, zedmonana poronana digon efepon, Osana sikurin vaparnasitu, tas repeteras ezrana magantite stefisi, stanidos enevidrus,
Thank you so much. Thank you. This was fantastic. Thank you very much, Mr. Klopas. And thank you for traveling us to the past in this dreamy musical way. Thank you.
I'm glad for that.
Thank you. So, after this fantastic introduction to the series, I would also like to convey a message from the mayor of Sparta, Mr. Michalis Vakalopoulos, who unfortunately could not be with us today, but he has sent me a message to read to all of you on his behalf as follows. So it is addressed to Professor Ju, Miss Quek and Mr. Lim, and also ladies and gentlemen. It's with great pleasure that we welcome you again this autumn to Sparta Live, the joint initiative developed by the Municipality of Sparta and the Center for Spartan and Peloponnesian Studies of the University of Nottingham. My pleasure is even greater when these online lectures feature distinguished academics and leading researchers and writers with a focus on the history of ancient Sparta. By attending these lectures, I am sure you will find that Sparta is more than the image of an authoritarian city, a barracks. Ancient Sparta was perhaps the most democratic city of ancient Greece. Just think of the position and active social role of the Spartan women, the Apella, that is the parliament of citizens, this institution of two kings in order to have a balance in governance, and of course the institution of the efforts who oversaw that the kings observed the morals and laws that were enacted by the great legislator Lycurgus and were for centuries the guarantee for social stability and cohesion, and of course for the promotion of the greatness of the city. With these few words, I would like to wish the series the best of luck and to give the floor to Professor Daniel Chu, Rachel Quek, and Enoch Lim of the National University of Singapore. And this is where Mayor Vakalopoulos' message ends. So, as Mayor Vakalopoulos' message has announced, today we are honored to host Dr. Daniel Ju and his two brilliant students, Rachel Quek and Enoch Lim. Few words about our esteemed speakers. Dr. Daniel Ju read classics at Trinity College at the University of Cambridge and is senior lecturer in the Department of History at the National University of Singapore. He is the author of several book chapters on the Spartan and Greek economy and co-editor of the book The Uncertain Past, Probability in Ancient History, which he co-edited with Drs. Lavan and Danon in 2023, and it appeared with Cambridge University Press. And also he has co-edited with Professors Osborne and Scott the book on Moses Finlay, an ancient historian and his impact, which was published also by Cambridge University Press in 2016. Rachel Quek graduated from the National University of Singapore in history earlier this year, where she took Daniel's survey courses on ancient Greece and Rome. Her honours thesis was on mythic empires, the formation of British colonial subjecthood through the classical past. Although at a very early age of her academic career, she is co-author with Daniel of a book chapter in Brill's Companion to the Spartan Tradition, edited by another esteemed colleague of ours, Dr. Ian McGregor Morris, and the book is under contract, and their paper is on Sparta-related discourse in colonial Singapore. And last but not least, Enoch Lim graduated from the National University of Singapore in history in 2022. His honours thesis was titled Tracing the Aegospotamoi Campaign, the Logistics of the Athenian Fleet at the End of the Peloponnesian War. He was Daniel's graduate teaching assistant in 2023, but he's currently at the University of Oxford in St. Catherine's College pursuing an MPhil in Greek history researching the training and tactics of the Athenian Navy. Daniel, Rachel, and Enoch will speak to us on teaching Spartan and ancient Greek history in Asia. Daniel, the virtual floor is yours.
Hey, thank you very much, Chrysanthi. Let me just share my slides, and that should be, whoops, because I have to struggle a little bit with this. Let me share this. Yeah, just need to get the presenter view running.
Yes,
okay, yes, okay, that's all working. So thank you very much, Chrysanthi, Dr. Galu, for the warm invite. For us here, it's really quite special for us to be able to join you from Singapore. It is actually just past 17 minutes past midnight over here. So welcome to everyone who's watching. So as introduced, I'm Daniel Ju, and here these are my former students, Rachel, Quek and Enoch Lim. And we all met, as shared, at the National University of Singapore, where I still teach. I'll ask to sort of briefly introduce ourselves. I guess I can go first. I sort of accidentally stumbled into Spartan history. I went to the UK in the 1990s. Here's a much younger version of me. Thinking that I would do modern colonial history. This is fondly known at Cambridge as the West and the Rest paper. But as fate would have it, I met two just really excellent and inspiring teachers. Many of you will recognize them. They're Professors Paul Millett and Paul Cartledge. And they eventually became my supervisors. So I ended up, long story short, with a PhD under Paul Cartledge, and thus as the only Singaporean teaching ancient history in local higher education here in Singapore. Though I do now have two colleagues in Roman history, Emmanuel Meyer and Stephen Green. Right, over to you, hey, Enoch and Rachel.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Enoch, and I'm currently working on my MPhil in ancient history at Oxford under Dr. Kaneinendijk. I studied under and also taught for Dr. Ju.
And I'm Rachel. I had the pleasure of doing my honours thesis with the supervising of Dr. Ju, and I'm currently working on the book chapter with him now while I'm working at the same time.
Thank you very much. Incidentally, I've admonished Rachel and Enoch many times since they graduated to call me Daniel, but here's a little example of Asian respect at work. Okay, great. So here's a roadmap of where we're headed tonight. We'll break it up into three sections. We'll open up with just to discuss some context and background. Not everyone will be perhaps that familiar with Singapore. So we're just going to discuss a little bit Singapore's sort of complicated relationship with her classical past, that is her Western classical past. And then next, we'll then move on to our own experience, both as teachers and students, as teaching assistant, of teaching and learning about Sparta and Greece here in Asia. And finally, Enoch will help us sum up with some conclusions about teaching and learning here in Asia. Okay, great. So let's dive right in. But just before we do that, one caveat, which is, as you know, Asia, as promised in the talk title, is massive. So, for example, Central Asia, South Asia, and East Asia are quite distinct and diverse regions. So we can actually really only speak to our own experiences here in our bit of Southeast Asia, which is shown here on the map, namely Singapore. So a little bit of context about Singapore. Have you perhaps been? Raise your hand, although I can't see it if you do. So this is sort of a typical tourist image of the Marina Bay Sands Hotel and Casino Complex. And Singapore is here in Southeast Asia and is very much a city-state, which by modern standards is actually tiny, with a land area of just 730 plus square kilometers. We do actually have quite a large population for that size. We're sort of all packed in. We have 4.2 million residents, and we actually have more sort of transients. So the population at any one time is roughly 5 or 6 million, and the major ethnicities are shown here on the slide. Now, interestingly, if Singapore, the city-state, had been a polis, a city-state in ancient Greece, then this land area would be enough to place it in which category of Hansen and Nielsen's inventory? And amazingly, Singapore, with just 700 square kilometers, actually makes it to the largest, the category 1 in the Greek inventory of Greek polis. However, classical Sparta, with an estimated land area of over 8,000 square kilometers, completely dwarfs it. So let's dive into our first main section. What is modern Singapore's relationship to the Western classical past? And let's start, first of all, with sort of our very own versions of foundation myths, if you like, which is that we have had 2 modern foundings. The first was, you probably guessed, by Stamford Raffles in 1819, founding British Singapore as an important port city within the Straits settlements. And the second was national independence in 1965 under Lee Kuan Yew, our first prime minister, that was on the act of separation from Malaysia. And now, interestingly, while some former colonies of, sort of topple down their colonial statues at independence, Singapore actually has a more or less positive view and relationship with its colonial past. And one legacy of this is that we actually learn and speak English as our first language, and it's also our medium of government and of schooling. Okay, in this picture, it shows actually it's a shop house in Chinatown, and it shows the original site of the colonial mission school that I myself attended as a child. And what might schools like this have taught about Greece and Rome before 1960? Now, we actually have quite good evidence for this pre-war period, thanks to Blackburn and Wu's study of the history education codes in Malaya and Singapore. At roughly age 7, Form 2 or Standard 2, children began to learn simple stories locally about Alexander, alongside other figures with local impact, such as Confucius and Buddha. And then the next year, at about age 8, Form 3, actually quite a wide range of classical figures. You can see this sort of hit list of famous ancients on the slide, highlighted Pericles, Archimedes, Julius Caesar, and many others are further introduced. And then the children then go on in the next 2 years, roughly age 9 to 10, to learn more about Greco-Roman and also other Asian civilizations, studying their maps, having talks on them, and so on. And although this is just a snapshot of the 1928 and 1936 codes, it hopefully gives a sort of rich sense of how English-speaking local elites during the colonial period were formally taught classical history. Right, I believe we're over to Rachel now.
Right, so taking a look now at some local newspapers might give us some insight into the ways that Sparta was consumed during the later days of Singapore's time as a colony. So here we've taken this quote from a 1931 issue of the Malayan Saturday Post. Specifically, this is a page of short stories and articles that were intended for a young audience. This is a story of a girl named Halcyon, for instance, which tells of a beautiful maiden who ran in races with young men and won the admiration of a young Spartan noble. He then married her, and she became a great lady in the warlike land of Sparta. So on the same spread, there was also this poem about a rainbow that stretches over fairyland and a retelling of Alexander taming Bucephalus. So combined with education, stories like these, pageants where women dressed as famous ladies of antiquity, various songs, and different plays, all help to familiarize the young with this kind of tropified and mythologized view of Sparta. From this example, scant as it is with historicizing context, a child would have had a reinforced view that Sparta was a warlike place and honored traits of athleticism. All this learning then, of course, builds this kind of familiarity and awareness of cultural legacies and rhetorical significance of using the Greeks in local and in imperial discourse. As a snapshot of the ways in which Singapore both received and echoed certain references to Sparta in discourse, We've taken this extract from Ludovici's Free Boys of Women's Influence from 1930, which was first printed in the Metropole and then reproduced in this local newspaper called the Straits Times. In this, Ludovici argues the Greek boy in Homeric times was his father's chela, and the Greek girl her mother's apprentice. In the 5th century, Sparta boys were expected to come under the exclusive direction of men at about the age of 7. So here we see that Ludovici draws upon this shared association of Sparta with ideas of masculine greatness to sort of argue for this idea of gender-segregated education, where boys should only be taught by men. This we can see exemplifies this kind of anxiety that existed at the time when female teachers were thought to be feminizing boys that they were teaching. So of course, what articles like this actually show is that an English-educated reader would not only be able to understand these references to Sparta, but also that it would have been effective as a rhetorical device in which it would have been a piece of persuasive writing targeted at a local audience. So in the later part of the 60s, we actually observe a decline in this type of discourse. Instead, we find that Sparta, vis-a-vis, of course, Athens, plays a specific role in punctuating speeches and statements made about independent Singapore's need for national service, which is the conscription of the young male citizen in Singapore, which was introduced in 1967. Consistently, these defining traits of both Sparta and Athens were extolled to make the point that Singapore should develop both ruggedness and an intellectual capacity in the regional and global stage that it emerged in. Over time, these politicians who were raised in the educational and cultural context of late empire outgrew their offices, and they were eventually succeeded by those that grew up in independent Singapore. This was then accompanied by a growing population that did not have the same colonial education as their predecessors. And so these types of references actually declined in the 80s and the 90s until a more recent resurgence that we think might be likely due to globalization trends and popular culture, as we see in movies like 300.
Right. At the same time, Greek history also continues to be relevant to Singapore in the sphere of national security. And we find that Thucydides' famous line that the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must, and the fate of the millions continues to be used to highlight the sense of vulnerability that Singapore and Singaporeans should feel, and so justify Singapore's approach to defense and foreign affairs. And here we have former Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong using Thucydides in this very way in a lecture that he delivered in 2015, where he laid out Singapore's approach to foreign relations.
Well, thank you very much, Rachel and Enoch. So now that we've set the stage with a little bit of Singapore's colonial relationship with the classical past, now let's take a look at teaching and learning about Sparta and Greece in our own university currently. So my Greek history course is taught within the NUS, which was founded in its current form in 1980. It does actually have several predecessors before that. And it's a large public university with about 40,000 students, both undergrads and postgrads. And it can be said to be quite global, with about 100 nationalities amongst those students. And as previously shared, we teach in English. And all three of us think that one should be deeply suspicious of university rankings, but for what it's worth, these following ranking bodies put the NUS amongst the top 30 globally. And this next table should give some notion of what classical courses are currently taught at NUS. Now, my own courses, which are year 2 courses on Greece and Rome, are highlighted here in green, and they're taught within the Department of History. And to my knowledge, until these were introduced roughly 5 years ago, there had been no standalone courses on ancient Greece or Rome, for that matter, in the department for perhaps roughly the last 40 years, perhaps roughly since it started to recede after independence. Now, there are two rather important caveats to this table. The first is that the Yale NUS College, a joint venture so to speak, between Yale in the United States and NUS, had actually so-called, so to speak, carried the flag for classics very strongly. They had a very broad slate of courses from 2011, but sadly, they are closing their doors next year. And secondly, while I did try and look up the course catalog, this data is admittedly impressionistic on my part, so it may not be entirely complete or accurate. So both my courses, as shared, are surveys of Greece and Rome, respectively. I sort of like to warn my students that they're like helicopter tours of main themes and topics, since we only have 13 teaching weeks. Now, there's thankfully been quite high interest so far, with close to about 100 students or so who enroll each year in each course. And the course is graded, so it does count to students' grade point averages here at NUS, although there is an option to convert the course to a pass-fail basis. And this next survey should give some sense of the composition of course members. Roughly half tend to be history majors, and the other half just from law, engineering, business, computing, so anywhere in the university, and just taking the course out of personal interest. Now, very briefly, the course is designed pedagogically according to sort of two sets of learning theories. The first is Biggs's theory of constructive alignment, and this is where planned learning outcomes, classroom teaching activities, and course assessments align to help achieve desired learning goals. The second bit of theory is from Fink, and this is his theory that foundational knowledge, application, the human dimension, and learning how to learn, amongst other things, dimensions, make up what he terms as significant learning. The teaching structure of the course is quite traditional. We have the traditional large whole group lecture, roughly 100 students, and this has also the time-honored, roughly 20-page main reading assigned for that week with supplementary readings. We also have bi-weekly smaller group tutorial teaching of up to 25 students, and this is the sort of class that Enoch would have taught. Now, the course assessments, inter alia, consist of short reflections after each lecture, a primary source analysis paper, which is actually on Athens and or Sparta, and a final research paper. Now, let's take a brief look at the lecture topics. I divide the semester into roughly two main sections and a third small section. So in the first half of semester, we need to provide students starting from almost zero with sufficient background. So we run through the chronological sequence of Greek history from archaic Greece to Alexander, with Athens, Sparta, and the Peloponnesian War, all major topics. Our students seem to particularly enjoy the thematic sequence, which we do after the break. And in this sequence, we cover women, slavery, the economy, art, science, philosophy, and religion. And finally, at the end of semester, we sort of allow ourselves to let our hair down a little bit, and we have a non-examinable lecture on pop culture, which is just a lot of fun, as the students nominate their favorite bits of pop culture to me to talk about through a survey. And of course, it's a big pop culture that is related to ancient Greece. And here's just one example of a lecture slide that I might use. And this is on Spartan values. It just happens to be. Now, if you took a look at this slide, might you be able to identify its constituent teaching and learning elements, perhaps? So well done if you notice that it has a title. And on the left here, we have a main content section. It has a primary, and actually right down there in the footer, references to secondary sources. One of Stephen Hodgkinson's readings is actually one of them. There's a picture here for interest, David painting, and a significance box. And these were my attempt to connect to Fink's dimensions of significant learning. The main content helps build foundational knowledge, and I also the sources are there to help demonstrate to students that this comes from somewhere. The information is based on credible secondary and primary sources, including that week's readings. So this just helps us start to build up competency in making historical judgments, assessing where information is from, and what ultimately supports historical views and arguments. Now, the picture is my attempt to sort of add in a bit of the human dimension, and the significance box then just helps students to apply and connect the dots, say, to the idea that with these strong values, then Sparta would have some of the best hoplites in Greece, and this would have made their defeat in 425 to the Athenians at Saxira even just all the more shocking. Right, and as mentioned, the pop culture is, well, very popular, and this slide is based on student nominations of the Assassin's Creed Odyssey video game, which is set in ancient Greece. It has a playable woman main character, Cassandra. She's a mercenary, and this is sort of just a really nice chance at the end of semester to review earlier learning about Greek women and to conclude in a style a bit similar to the Insider series on YouTube that this is historically unlikely to have happened. And incidentally, the expert here is Roel, Enoch's supervisor at Oxford, and whom I'm very pleased to say is amongst the audience tonight. Hi there, Roel. Hey, and here's an example of a role play we do in small group tutorials. It's very fun and very loud as students simulate electing a member of the Spartan Gerousia, or Council of Elders. Students first do some homework, reading Plutarch's account of the process, which was by acclamation, which is to say, shouting very loudly as each candidate walked through the assembly. This is something students tend to find novel, as shown in this quote. Class members are given roles on these sort of little cards with instructions. There are variously candidates, judges, those are the ethos. They could be supporters of particular candidates, or they could just be regular Spartiates who can be swayed by the shouts of others. Now, so far, the neighboring card classes haven't complained. At the end, students discuss their first-hand experiences of how communal voting in this manner might impact voting behaviors and outcomes. And here we're back over to Enoch.
Right, thank you. Yeah, and we always end our classes with a slide on local application, where we ask students to reflect on what they have learned and connect it to their own context. So, for example, after a lesson on Spartan and Athenian government, which included the Gerousia roleplay from before, we ask students to think about modern governments and reflect on connections or contrasts between the two. And in line with what Fink calls the human dimension of learning, this encourages students to make personal meaning from the content and see the relevance of studying Greek history for their own lives and beyond. For example, again, right, how British conceptions of Greek and Western civilization impacted Singapore. And we've also found that these more informal discussions help students to ideate without the fear of embarrassing themselves in front of their peers.
All right, so now let's take a look at some student responses that were received over various iterations of the Sparta lecture to show how students were able to engage with the material in a way that was both meaningful and also relevant to their own lived experiences. So let's take a look at these colored quotes here. In this presentation, I think we've shown how national service has consistently served as a mirror through which Spartan values can be understood. Through this experience that would have been shared by a significant population of the male students in Singapore. Some have also related their experiences of communal living in college, coupled with the external stresses and various threats that were experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, to the common messes of Sparta. And students were also able to relate their learning to the common curriculum that we all studied in secondary school, which covered World War II. And finally, we have these two quotes, which shows that students were able to use their learning about Sparta to make sense of the world around them, in particular with regards to modern politics and governance and various matters of current affairs that might have caught their attention over the semester.
Hey, great. So those were the two longer sections. We've now reached in the very much shorter conclusion section about what are our thoughts about teaching and learning Spartan history and Greek history in Asia.
Right. So in our experience, teaching Spartan and Greek history in Asia does come with several advantages. The students who enroll often have a high degree of interest from having encountered the classical past in fiction like Percy Jackson, or through Netflix shows, or even video games such as Assassin's Creed and Hades. And in general, Sparta and Greece are seen as novel and different, and so interesting. Some students even become interested in the classical past because of their religious background. Nearly 20% of Singaporeans indicate that they are Christians on government surveys. And we also find that students come in with few preconceived notions about Greek history, apart from what they've been exposed to in pop culture. At the same time, in Asia, students also tend to be hardworking and respectful. And all of these make for a student body that's highly engaged and eager to learn. However, speaking as a student, there are also challenges with learning in Asia. One of the reasons why us students are so hardworking is the high priority that we tend to give to grades, which can lead to anxiety and a fear of failure. And sometimes we can become more focused on performing rather than learning. And combined with a fear of being embarrassed or losing face, this can cause us to become reluctant to participate in class. At the same time, most of us lack any background knowledge in Spartan or Greek history beyond pop culture, which can make the course feel unfamiliar and intimidating, with a high information load in the first half of the lectures. We also had no Greek or Latin, as these languages are not taught in Singapore schools. I myself, for example, only started to learn ancient Greek after taking this course. And so we had to use the sources in translation instead. And finally, Greek history can feel quite alien to us in Asia. So this is where the local application slides, for example, really help us to make personal connections with the content and keep us engaged and interested.
Hey, thank you very much, Enoch and Rachel. So we've been doing this for about 5 or 6 years now. So what are some of the impacts we've seen on local students? Because in a sense, we were almost starting from zero, right? So it's a little bit like setting up a factory conveyor belt. And so now we have actually had a number of honors theses and also one master's thesis on classical topics. We've already done the introduction, so I won't read out all these points. But I'm immensely proud of Rachel, Enoch, and also some of my other students. As shared, Rachel is a co-author of a book chapter under contract with Brill, and Enoch is now studying with Roll at Oxford. We also have with us here tonight in the audience Brian Goh. He was for many years the main course TA for Greece and Rome. He actually contributed a lot to the teaching and instructional design. I'm very pleased to share that he won 2 graduate teaching awards for his contributions. And Brian is currently completing his PhD in modern religion at the University of Michigan. Okay, great. So we've actually come to the end, and I believe we're even on time. So here are our references and our thank yous, especially to Dr. Gallo for inviting us, and all at the center and the university staff at Nottingham for just hosting us, hosting this broadcast and making it all possible. Thank you very much. So I believe we're going to hand the chair back to Chrysanthi now for Q&A. But before that, just a really quick note. that I'm delighted to share my teaching materials, rubrics, marking schemes, and so on, just drop me an email if you happen to be a teacher in the audience. Right, Chrysanthi, should I stop sharing now or should I leave the slides up?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Stop sharing. Right. Okay, thank you.
So thank you so much, Daniel, Rachel. This has been fantastic. It's the first time that we had like a lecturer and the students jointly presenting. So it's really fascinating. And it's also like, as someone being such like passionate about Spartan archaeology and history, to see like how this is transforming Sparta, maybe transforming the brains of really bright students, and also the way that you are forming really good citizens. I'm really impressed by the responses to the course, and as a Greek myself, I really feel proud that this wonderful country like Singapore are teaching Greek history and Spartan history. I'm really, really impressed. Thank you, all three of you. This has been fascinating.
Ευμένης παρεστέ